Thanks so much. So confirming I've got my screen on my laptop here for everybody to see. The discussion topic here today is primarily intended for ad operations folks, with the intention of providing you with tools within your kind of marketing toolkit in order to do things like track discrepancies using Beeswax Macros. So within most modern ad servers, they support this functionality of data pass. And in order to kind of kick off the discussion, I think it's worth creating a foundation here. First of all, what is a macro? Within the ad tech industry, most systems have macros. They're tokens that get dynamically replaced during the ad serving sequence with some bit of information, whether it's a domain URL or a publisher identifier or even an auction ID. So these macros are dynamically replaced during ad serve, often not replaced during things like creative preview. What are some common buzz macros? Well, within our documentation at docs.beeswax.com, we actually have reference to all of our supported macros. Some of the most commonly utilized ones are things like domain URL, RTB site ID, placement ID, publisher ID, etc. And then what is data pass using macros? Well, that actually is related to taking Beeswax macros and populating your external ad tags or click URLs with Beeswax macros for Beeswax to populate during our ad serving sequence. We can then dynamically replace those values and pass that into any external systems, whether it's an ad server, Google Analytics, or a click URL. Cool. Just a brief outline of the RTB process. The impression request is sent from the end user's device through an SSP. That request is then sent to the DSP, where the DSP will then bid back through the SSP, and the SSP renders that ad delivery. And you start to think about this communication across systems and why there might be value in passing information from one system to another. In my example here, the RTB request is from a specific domain URL, which is also supported as a macro. The SSP will send that specific request through a publisher ID. There's a publisher ID macro for that if you want to track that information. The bid response from the DSP is intended to respond back with a specific creative ID. So we will have a specific creative ID macro that's supported as well. And then last, we have this concept of ad delivery, where the server of record will track the impression and click. And often that ad server of record wants to keep or track all of that information. So Beeswax recommends utilizing data pass in order to push things like the domain URL, the publisher ID, or the click ID into those external impression and click URLs. Awesome. So the goal of this data pass into the ad server, the pass of external values into external systems via macros for reporting as well as creative purposes. Data pass into the counter of record for reporting will be great for discrepancy tracking, whereas the data pass into the creative attributes is utilized for things like click-through URLs and impression URLs. All right. So let's cover implementation. Within DCM ad server, the data pass has two different flavors, I guess you could say. Example one that we'll cover off on is intended for low cardinality values. And that allows for granular reporting and discrepancy assessment, and it's available off the shelf within DCM's report builder. Example number two that we'll cover off on is intended for high cardinality values. And it's great for creative functionality, but it's only available within data transfer files or log level data from the DCM ad server. For both of these examples, I'm going to utilize the template or the sample tag that I have referenced on my screen here, which is a relatively straightforward JavaScript-based ad tag from DoubleClick or DCM. You'll notice that it's got a site name, a placement ID, and an ad size, as well as a cache buster that is intended for either a timestamp macro, an auction ID macro, or a random number. So example number one, this is that low cardinality stuff, things that aren't user or impression specific, and instead directly related to the inventory that you're purchasing or bidding on. In this example, we're going to utilize the keyword parameter that's available within DCM and available off the shelf for all of their users. You'll notice in this specific ad tag, I've got a bunch of Beeswax macros concatenated together. And while that does increase the cardinality, it's still relatively low cardinality in the grand scheme of things. And the recommendation from Beeswax is to utilize something like keyword equals the inventory source, the publisher ID, the app identifier and site identifier, as well as the domain and app bundle. And you'll notice that for any given single impression, it should either be from site or from app. And it should either be associated with a domain or an app bundle. So as you serve these in real time, not all, let's say 5 of these macros will get replaced. Instead, only 3 of them will. And any value or macro that isn't actionable or active at that point in time will get replaced with a null string. So if you serve into a site or a web page, you'll notice that the app bundle and the app ID values, while the macro is present, will get replaced with a null value. And we are delineating all of these macros with a vertical pipe. You can choose any delineating character you would like as long as they're URL friendly. I will say that vertical pipe has worked best for our team. If you utilize things like underscore, every once in a while you'll encounter app IDs or site IDs that contain an underscore character. Really up to you based on what you designate as best for your workflow. Now, implementing it into the actual DCM ad tag, that's where you'll see this tag defaults, where there's a keyword handling value at the very bottom, and you can just do insert placeholder, which will then allow for your ad operations team to override it with any concatenated set of macros that you'd like. Example number 2, this is the high cardinality stuff, the things that are more auction or impression specific. And that actually supports user-generated content. The keyword macro that I discussed in example 1 is off the shelf and available from Beeswax or from DCM. It's always KW equals. You do have the ability to create user-generated key value pairs. And in this example, you'll see I utilize foo equals zip code and bar equals auction ID. And the implementation within DCM, it's actually in that same placements UI of DCM, and you simply implement it within that text field that's in the red box highlighted on my screen under the field additional key values. As far as data pass support is found in DCM across tracking ads. These are impression pixels and click URLs. So you can data pass keywords or user generated key values for things like impression pixels and click URLs, assuming you're allowing Beeswax to be the ad server and you simply need to track the impression and click events in DCM. It's also supported across their JavaScript tag format, their iframe tag format, as well as their INS tags and their VAS URLs for our video buyers. Other modern ad serving systems that I have found support this functionality of data pass include Celtra, Flash Talking, RevJet, and Extreme Reach. You'll notice that when you generate tags, assuming you've specified that you're intending on trafficking those tags within Beeswax, those tags will come out of their external ad serving systems with the Beeswax macros already present. If you have questions, you can always reach out to support@beeswax.com or your bidder specific email alias in order to have our team give it a review and an assessment and make sure that you're set up properly and it will function as you intend or expect. Covering off on the practical use cases for things like keyword data pass and user-generated custom key value data pass. For discrepancy tracking, keyword data pass enables ad servers to compare data, right? Beeswax will allow for you to export impression level data across those 5 macros that I referenced: inventory, source, site, app ID, domain, app bundle. So you can then pass that into DCM and do a apples to apples comparison across systems, utilizing those as your breakout attributes for reporting. Additionally, it's great for out of geo discrepancies. Every once in a while, we have clients that provide us with feedback of DCMs flagging these impressions are being rendered out of geo. Often it's associated with server-side ad insertion or something nuanced like that, at which point in time you can do things like pass zip code or some other geographic identifier into DCM and do an apples to apples comparison to see if maybe all of the out of geo discrepant impressions logged in DCM are coming from a single publisher ID or zip code or placement ID within RTB, which will allow for you to track down and block those given servers so that your marketer clients no longer see out of geo discrepancies. Additionally, we allow for things like a device type macro in case you think that the out of geo discrepancies are coming from a specific device type like connected television instead of desktop or mobile. And then last would be around this creative functionality. you can actually take RTB attributes and pass them directly into things like the click URL that you have within DCM, utilizing either keywords or the user-generated key values. And this is great if you're using an MMP to track clicks for maybe mobile app installs. This allows for you to take the Beeswax auction ID, pass it through your DCM ad tag, your Celtra ad tag, etc., and push it directly into that URL so your MMP has access to the auction for both impression as well as click URL. We've also found a lot of media agency clients or direct marketers use UTM parameters for things like campaign ID, placement ID, or the domain where the click emanated from. You can utilize this data pass to pass Beeswax macros from RTB directly into the click URL and use those macros to populate those UTM parameters. So you don't have to do things like hard code UTM parameters and build out a bunch of line items in Beeswax so that there's a one-to-one relationship between your UTM codes and your tactics. Awesome. Impractical use cases. There's a certain point where you take it too far. And we have had clients that say like, well, can I utilize macros for everything and just make my life easier? Well, yes, you can, but there's kind of like a practical and impractical use case where you say like, are we using macros too much? And you'll notice in this top example, we're using alternative identifiers from Beeswax in order to populate values that are normally hard-coded into the DCM ad tag, as well as macros in order to dynamically populate the ad size for width and height. And then last, we're using the auction ID to dynamically replace the cache buster. It's very similar to a random number or a timestamp. At a certain point in time, we do recommend if your vendor is providing you with ad tags that have hard-coded values, like the site or placement values, as well as the ad sizes in your DCM ad tag or your Celtra ad tag, stick with those. Keep them hard-coded. Utilize macros for things like data pass and reporting and click-through URLs, rather than generating a single DCM ad tag and using macros to dynamically select or insert the placement that you want to call from DCM. And with that acknowledged, I've utilized my 15 minutes. I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions.
Wonderful, John. Well, thank you. That was really helpful for me to understand. This is the first time I've been introduced to that topic, and I'm not in ad ops, but it was easy to follow. We do have a few questions. Let's get started with those, and we'll see if we can stump John Totten. First question, do you have an example to show on screen for the KW data pass using the INS tag format from DCM?
Oh, man. Let me make sure that there is no client-specific data that I would not feel comfortable sharing, and I can drag something onto screen if that's okay with you.
Sure.
All right. So you will notice that this is an INS tag with the DCM parameter being test. So this is the test version for that specific aspect. Let me quickly make sure. I should have something else here in the key value section, and it would look something like this, data-DCM keywords, where you can then do things like pass the inventory source. So it's just an additional line within the INS tag. The one thing I will recommend is if you're using INS tags, go ahead and make sure that that keyword insert placeholder is selected in the DCM UI, because there is something like carriage returns and tabs and spaces that you need to be made aware of so that you don't break that INS tag. Mm-hmm. Of course, always reach out to Beeswax support. If you have questions, that's what we're here for. We want to make sure that you feel confident prior to launching your campaigns. But if you utilize the DCM UI, it's relatively straightforward. It will export with a placeholder, which you can then replace with whichever concatenated macros you decide upon.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. Moving on to the next question. Is there the ability to match log level data files between Beeswax and DCM using data pass?
Yeah, so the keyword data pass that I indicated as example use case 1, that goes directly into Report Builder. But as I indicated, it's intended for low cardinality. If you want to do like log level data matching, DCM does support this concept of DTF, which I believe is data transfer files, and that is their version of log level data. You can use either keyword or those user-generated key values and pass in information from Beeswax like the auction ID, stuff that's not PII or user information. You can pass that auction ID directly into DCM and then join the data sets together based on that auction ID so that you can compare log level data from DCM
All right. Next question, does anything need to be enabled for this to work on in DCM or other ad servers?
You know, I have I have not found that it requires any special configuration with DCM. It's generally supported right off the bat for all of the ad tags that I've indicated across banner as well as video. And in general, you know, you can have your media or marketer clients generate those keywords and put them in ahead of time, or you can just manually inject them without any pre-knowledge or intentional setup. So it normally just works right off the bat, no additional configurations. And you can manually inject these into those ad tags if you as an operational person want to do that on behalf of your clients.
All right, next question. Are there any privacy concerns around macros?
Yeah, I wouldn't pass PII, right? Like if you view it as PII, don't pass it. In general, it's just best practices for a lot of stuff. So steer away from PII and use proxies that you can get really granular with. Things like auction ID or anything that's not user specific. I generally steer away from PII just because I'm not a lawyer and it's kind of the great unknown.
Sure, sure. And last question, do the macros need to be implemented within the DCM UI?
They do not. So you can utilize that kind of placeholder feature set from DCM and then manually inject whatever macros you decide upon. You can even change those macros halfway through the course of a flight or a campaign. Just understand there will be a structural break within the data. So they do not need to be pre-configured within the DCM UI. You can manually override those placeholders or just inject them on your own.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, John, for teaching us on this topic. And thank you all for joining and for some great questions. And we will see you at the next 15 minutes with Beeswax. Thanks for tuning in.
Awesome. Thanks all.